Hello, I'm Callum and welcome to my video on polymers made from renewable resources. Now, the first important thing to discuss is what polymers actually are. Polymers are long-chain molecules that are made up from lots of repeating units formed from smaller molecules known as monomers. They have very versatile properties and as a consequence have lots of uses in everything from 3D printing and medicine to clothing and transport. They get these versatile properties because of the different functional groups that can go into your polymer. So for example, Kevlar in the bottom has amide groups, and this means it can hydrogen bond between each of the chains, and this makes it really strong because hydrogen bonds are difficult to break, and it makes it really rigid and tough. Whereas polyethylene has very weak interactions between each chain. It's a low density, so it's used quite flexible and quite a weak material. We can also affect the properties of polymers by having a different MW, so the weight average molecular mass, and this is weighted to have a higher mass because longer chains have a higher effect on the properties overall. And we can also affect the properties by having copolymers. So this is when you have two or more functional groups within your polymer, and you can affect these more specifically by having block copolymers. So this is where you have different blocks of different units. You might have some like 10 carbonate units, then 10 propylene units, etc. And by varying the amounts of each unit, you can affect the properties in different ways. And it's because of these versatile properties that we have lots of different versatile uses of polymers, from everything from packaging and pipes to crayons, paints, glue, heart valves, and we end up annually using 300 megatons of polymers. So they are incredibly important to our day-to-day lives, but there are lots and lots of problems with this. And the problem is that 6% of all the oil worldwide gets used to produce polymers, and 99% of all polymers are formed from fossil fuels. And this means we're going to emit a huge amount of greenhouse gases, and eventually we're going to run out of oil to get polymers from. So 19% of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide are made from fossil fuel extractions, and this means we're going to have to change this a lot to get a feasible source of polymers to take us in the future. So we need alternatives that have a lower effect on the environment and have properties that match their petrochemical counterparts, but also, most importantly, considering that is what the presentation is about, they've got to be renewable, otherwise I get no marks. So the first way we can form renewable polymers is by using carbon dioxide and epoxides, which is a functional group shown in the top right, where we have a 3-centered ring, which is really strained, and the oxygen atom is in the ring. And from this, we catalyse the production of polymers with CO2 from epoxides like propylene oxide and limonene oxide. From these monomers, we can produce polylimonene carbonate in the top right, made from limonene oxide and carbon dioxide. And in the bottom right, we have polypropylene carbonate made from propylene oxide and carbon dioxide. Now, these are really important polymers as we can alter their properties, so they're quite versatile. We can do this, for example, by block copolymerization, so we can change the amounts of carbon dioxide units and propylene oxide units, or limonene oxide units, for example, and this will change properties as the chains will interact differently with each other. And we can also have different MWs, so we can change the masses of each chain. So for example, low mass polymer chains might be used for adhesives or clothing as they're a bit weaker because there are fewer attractions between each chain, or we can have high mass polymer chains which are much stronger because they have more attractions between each chain, and these are used for things like binders or sacrificial materials where you might surround another material to prevent the material beneath from reacting. Another advantage is that life cycle assessments have been done where the entire lifetime of a material is assessed. So we might assess the production, its usage, and then its disposal, and that's shown that 11 to 20% less carbon is emitted by producing polypropylene carbonate this way than you producing it without carbon dioxide. It's also biodegradable, so you don't have to send it to landfill. It's much more beneficial for the environment. And also limonene is renewable, as we get it from citrus fruit, and limonene is also useful, as any excess limonene that might not be used to form limonene oxide can now be used to dissolve other polymer chains that otherwise aren't biodegradable, so that it's used to dissolve polystyrene, for example. However, unfortunately, polypropylene oxide is produced by using fossil fuels, which obviously emit carbon dioxide, and that isn't great. And then we need more research to go into catalysts before we can actually use this commercially and create a lot of polypropylene carbonate or polylimonene carbonate or other carbonates this way. We can also form renewable polymers from terpenes, which are oils made from plants that have an isoprene unit in them. So for example, limonene here has an isoprene unit in the box shown there. These can be taken from lots of plants, and we extract turpentine as well, which is a mixture of terpenes and limonene, which we take from citrus fruit as well. These polyterpenes are also really helpful because, just as we had for polycarbonates, we can use block copolymerization and change the number of units of each monomer to change the properties of the polymer, so they're really versatile. And they can also sometimes have a really versatile and helpful property of thermoplastic elastomers. So you heat them up sometimes, and then you'd be able to change their shape, and then they'd cool down and become that shape. And then you could bend them, and then they'd go back to that shape, which is a really helpful property. They're also used commercially, for example, in rubber. So generally, an important ingredient in rubber is polyisoprene, which is an example of a terpene. Another example of a property that they have is that they can remain rigid at high temperatures, which sometimes can't be seen in polymers that we get from the petrochemical industry, so from like crude oil, which is very helpful, and they are also biodegradable. However, in order to make them useful, you would have to go through lots more reactions. So for example, with vinyl monomers, which is an example of an alkene seen down here, so the alkene with a CH double bonded to a CH2 group makes that a vinyl monomer. You'd have to go through more reactions with those to make them commercially useful. They are very expensive, and at low temperatures their mechanical properties aren't as effective as they are from crude oil polymers, which we need to make useful polymers for the future. So we can also use vegetable oils to produce polymers, where we can create triglycerides from the seeds. So for example, soybean and sunflowers sometimes get used, and we have 3 long chains bonded to a glycerol unit shown on the right. We can also react these with castor oil to then produce polyamides like nylon 11 and nylon 410. Or we can have transesterification reactions, so we can move this ester group and put something else on the other side of it to create a new ester, and create 3 of these, and they don't have to be the same ester. They can have different chains from the triglyceride that go onto this new ester. So they're quite helpful reactions. And we can also genetically modify algae, for example, to create these triglycerides, which scientists have shown have a yield of 20 to 50%. So the use of vegetable oils to produce polymers is going to be really beneficial, because the nylons that are produced from castor oil are already commercially used in things like tubing and insulation, because they're really strong and rigid because of their hydrogen bonds between each of the chains. And we can also have polyesters, which have really high thermal and chemical resistance, and these are generally better than the petrochemical industry. However, they aren't biodegradable, but those that are made from the petrochemical industry aren't either, so we need ideally a more suitable alternative. Castor oil is really expensive. It's double the expense of other oils to use to form polymers, and also those that are made in the petrochemical industry are a lot cheaper, so we could use crude oil, for example, and that would be a lot less expensive. To summarise, polymers are essential parts of daily life. We produce 300 megatons of polymers every year, and there are lots and lots of uses. However, at the moment, 99% of polymers are produced from non-renewable resources like crude oil, so this needs to change for the future. However, for it to change, the polymers we produce have to be renewable, they have to be cheap, they have to be biodegradable, and they have to have properties that are on the same level as or better than the ones we have at the moment that are derived from crude oil or other non-renewable resources. However, the future is looking bright because there are lots of different areas of research that we can go down due to how versatile polymers are. For example, they have different functional groups that interact with each other in different ways and allow for different properties, as well as copolymerization and the way that masses of each polymer chain also affects the properties of the polymer. So it's also positive that there are also commercially available polymers that are produced renewably, like insulation, adhesives and clothing. Thank you for listening. That has been my video on polymers. Thank you.